Okay, this lesson for the Corny Project class, it's somewhat therapeutic. I sometimes play the counselor. As a pastor, it's hard not to, but knowing how hard you all work and the labor and the toil, it's a very cognitive engagement. You have to be very deliberate and be willing to engage in a meaningful pursuit of truth. Dialogue, for example, as we collaborate. So collaborative reasoning, collective learning is the process. Now that's totally lacking in our culture, for example. We don't think of much meaningful conversation in the very hyper politicized world we're living in. The same about the religionized. You remember we were evaluating the before or after regeneration, and you all who studied and used the Bible noticed that we're generated through the gospel. Remember that conduit, and that's how the word picture is, and that's in 1 Corinthians 4:15. And then you remember we had the before and after, all before, all after. Again, that's the extreme. There is no meaningful conversation there, and we found that the gospel first, then the finite verb believe, finite verb. Remember, this is a language class. And then we had the generation. And that's through that same gospel, the gospel that started it. It's all gospel. We're called by the gospel. We're fathered through the gospel. We're saved by the gospel. You can find all that in the Bible. And then on the other end there, out comes one who is believing. And that's a participle. And that's gerundive noun, participle. Of course, 1 John 5:1, those of you that did your research, you found that generation was prior to the participle. So where will you find people that really have a vested interest in knowing the truth? Well, in a covenant community, which is a foreign concept to most in the field of religion, a covenant community is there to disciple all the nations, and we also fellowship, steadfastly continue in the apostles' doctrine, consequently come into a common union, and then in that common union we break bread, that is, eat the Lord's Supper. We come to be competent to examine ourselves, to self-correct, to abandon social status. So that chaos addiction is foreign to the new covenant community, or should be. So this is what we learned. But where will you find people that notice even the distinction between an act of an unregenerate to believe or the consequence of being one who's always believing? That is, you couldn't describe one who's always believing, a believer, any better than the one having been fathered out from God. So now we have that. But you say, well, why is it still either or, all or nothing? Well, there's really nothing else to, anything else would diminish the friction. There would be no catalysis. And it appears that since the constructs are dead, and they are, since they're fallible and they always will be, that the only life they have is catalysis, which generates friction, conflict, chaos. It doesn't lead to order. It's just either orism. So we've learned all that. And we've learned, you remember the young or all old, where what you're asked to do is forget and don't think about the difference between chronological and biological and geological ages. You're just asked, don't even talk about that. It's either all of this or all of that. You remember you won't discuss decay rates. You'll also omit the ratio that you find in Psalm 90, and then Peter wrote about it, or he explained an application of it and why we're dying 10 times faster today. So because you all have come out and you have this aptitude, you're like the Bereans, you want to search the scriptures. We're not just searching to check someone else out, though, however. We're wanting to understand first ourselves and let others search the scriptures, see if we might know what we're talking about. So, and then we had that final one, which is a good illustration. Well, not the final one. We had that it's all tribulation or none or no tribulation. So it's all or nothing, you see. And what did we learn? That in Revelation 7:14, out from, that's the word exit, by the way, where we get exit, that EX. So that EX is where we get out from, that exodus out from the tribulation. Remember, that was the great one. That one's in the future. And then B, we had Revelation 3:10, where we'll be kept out from, there he is again, the EX as in exit. The great trial. We're starting to see some echoes here. And that's because we kept the word of his patience. That focused the ecclesia on its task, remain on task, and make it, it's always about the word of Jesus' patience. And we also noticed in the word after the tribulation. And we noticed that was from meta, and that is amid. So that was quite fascinating, isn't it? That when we evaluate these things and someone asks us, are you pre or are you post? And we can notice quite quickly that something's missing. Remember, this is an all tribulation or no tribulation. And then we have amid, right? And that can really quell a lot of the friction, because sometimes the only interest we have is the chaos that ensues, and sometimes the only communication we have can be negative. For example, the feedback from our apologetic and outreach ministry, some of the most harsh things I've ever noticed. And as a professional, for example, when I am in a consultative responsibility, I find it fascinating that religion is one of the few fields, if not one of the exclusive fields, that does not want improvement, because improvement would bring more of a mutual understanding. Because even when people debate, I noticed they never debate so that each side has a better understanding. For example, if you improved, let's say one of the fallible constructs, let's say Calvinism, the fallible soteriological construct, if you improve it, instead of it being an improved form of Calvinism, it eliminates Calvinism. And that's why it's almost intellectual idolatry when it is intellectual idolatry when someone presents Calvinism as infallible. Now that's a problem, because that's really no responsibility. That's an extreme, and whoever would do that would have to be deliberately, knowingly ignoring all the fallible elements and features within it. So that's enough, but just notice that unless it's all or nothing, all before, all after, striking that God's wisdom says through the gospel. He says the gospel is written, John 20:31, that you might believe, punctual action. Then believing, that's the gerundive noun, that present active participle. 1 John 5:1 places generation prior to the participle, not the final article. So there is no text. Let's just conclude in number one. No text anywhere in the Greek New Testament places regenerate prior to the finite verb believe. So that That's very good, though. I'm thankful that we evaluate it, even though it certainly doesn't find you always admired for diligent study. The Bible does commend us for it. All young or all old, of course, young is chronological age, old is geological. We have decay rates. We understand the ratio. That was a fascinating study, but that would forever remain lost in the extreme because much study is wearisome to the flesh. So, and meditating and thinking again, and those types of things don't find a person, those kind of people who think on the Word of God, and as you all are doing, and laboring and toiling and rereading it and considering it again and thinking about it and placing it in the context and taking a holistic approach to your hermeneutic, a systematic approach according to categories in your theology, and a linguistic or lexical syntactical according to your grammar. We're not really, that wouldn't be found among the dramatic, and it's not the extreme. We'd be more in the serene. And here, all tribulation or no tribulation, that word, which is really striking to think about it, because it matches Matthew 11 very well when Jesus said on one side they pipe and expect you to dance, and on the other side they play a dirge, a real sad song, and expect you to pout. So the extreme is about manipulating people to go along. You all know that. You're pressured. Just go along with our side, all or nothing. And really, the only thing more distasteful is that they can't hear themselves speaking in the middle of all that chaos. Both sides are saying the same thing. They're taken to extremes for. We don't live in a very conversant culture. For example, I'll end on this. But Dr. Keith Lee wrote a book in 2007 entitled Addicted to Chaos, The Journey from Extreme to Serene. He described our culture as very extreme. He says the extreme theme has become the norm. It's very normative now to be extreme. People are increasingly seduced into believing this intensity and, that very amplified political arena that we have to watch all the time. We don't often think they've spent time studying political science, and you see the popular television programs, TV evangelists, they were once called, and everything is just, really hyped and really extreme, and it's really empty of any meaningful. But this type of life, it says, might produce heart-pounding excitement, but the absence of this addictive energy can bring about withdrawal, fear, and restlessness that's unbearable. So if you don't grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, about whom the entire scriptures speak concerning him, then, for example, you won't recognize the wisdom of God to make sure it's always about the gospel. The gospel's first. Those who believe are generated through it. We're called by the gospel, fathered by the gospel, saved by the gospel. You can find all those texts. We even have this text showing that it's prior to that person. And then the young and the old, you can study and learn why the brevity of life was the theme. God was gracious, warning us that we should number our days, and yet we still wait an entire year to have a birthday. And that's interesting because you would think to number our days, we would value them as much because we're dying 10 times faster. Our decay rate is accelerated 10 times faster than that prior to the flood. So you have a blessed day and continue to study. And when I say we're dying faster, don't get in a hurry because, as Dr. Murray said, hurry and Hebrew don't go together. Well, hurry and hermeneutics don't go together. Hurry and systematic apologetics don't go together. Deliberate, methodical, careful. And then you come out with all these great things that you can share with others and help them exit the drama and leave the extreme and come to the serene and keep the focus on Christ. For example, at Landmark in Jacksonville, the head of our church, he's the center of everything. And we're thankful for that. So you have a blessed day.